we all live in a kind of economic phantasmagoria, which is governed by economic statistics. And the question is whether these economic statistics have any validity. Today, we imagine that we have vast negative interest rates for $17 trillion worth of securities around the world. We imagine inverted yield curves. We imagine secular stagnation. We heard Peter Thiel's view that technology is actually in some kind of slump. There are a lot of enigmas, which I think will be resolved by our next speaker, Gale Pooley, who with Marion Tupy has developed a time prices model of the global economy and of global economic statistics, which shows that all these assumptions of prevailing economics are simply false by the key measure of actual value, which is registered by how many hours a typical worker has to spend to earn the money to buy anything. That's the real, it's time, as I've been saying for several years, which is the essential measuring stick across the whole economy. Even all the other measuring sticks like meters and kilograms and moles and amperes, all are ultimately based on frequencies that are based on time. And money has to be also based on time. And Gale Pooley from Brigham Young in Hawaii is going to illuminate this subject now. Thank you so much. I think it's a vitally important contribution he's making. And I'm delighted to announce he's the latest Discovery Fellow.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all coming today, and thank you, Discovery Institute, for hosting this event. I'd like to recognize Marion Tupy. He's my co-researcher on this. He's at Cato, and I appreciate his good work. We're very grateful for George for his inspiration and encouragement in the study that we've done. Let me get that. Okay, George will tell you these three things: that wealth is knowledge, that growth is learning, and that money is time. We're interested in this third principle, that money is time. So instead of measuring things with money, it might make more sense to try to measure things with time, thus the idea of a time price. So money prices are expressed in dollars and cents. Time prices are expressed in hours and minutes. So time prices are simply the money price divided by hourly income. So for example, if we look at oil, and say in 2015, oil was selling for $75 a barrel, but your hourly income was $15. A barrel of oil would cost you 5 hours. Today, if oil has gone to $60 a barrel, but your income is now $20 an hour, the time price is actually only 3 hours. So what makes more sense? That oil has fallen by 20% or 40%? So we like time prices for three reasons. The first reason is innovation shows up not only in lower prices, but it also shows up in higher incomes. So when you look at a time price, you're more fully capturing what innovation is doing. The second thing that we like about time prices is we use the universal constant of time. Governments, as Steve Forbes would tell us, governments can't print gold. Well, they can't print time either. So we're using this universal constant of time. And the third reason is we can completely ignore all of the deflator indexes, the CPI, the GDP deflator. We ignore all those because we're taking nominal price against nominal hourly income. So the contention and the subjectivity of those deflators, we ignore all of those. So we begin our study by looking at, really to test George's ideas about knowledge and learning, we analyzed the time prices of 50 foundational commodities. And we chose commodities because they really don't change much over time. You know, a pound of copper is a pound of copper, and a bushel of wheat's a bushel of wheat. So what we were really trying to measure is learning actually showing up in knowledge, showing up in prices. So if we can look at the change in the time price over time, maybe this is what we can really see. Okay? All right, we're ready to go to the next one. All right. So this might take okay, so we selected 50 different items. Energy, food, metals, minerals, materials, items that if you wanted to go to another planet and start another civilization, you'd like to take these things with you. Unfortunately, the World Bank and the IMF both keep good track of nominal price data on these commodities. So for the hourly income denominator, we went to the World Bank and the Conference Board. World Bank keeps track of GDP, nominal GDP, and the Conference Board keeps track of total hours worked. So if you take that ratio, you get GDP per total hours worked. We think this is a pretty good indicator of what's happening over time to hourly income. So let's take a look at wheat. Yeah, so we get World Bank's GDP, we get total hours worked from the Conference Board. We divide those two and we get GDP per total hours worked. That's our denominator in the equation. So let's take a look at wheat. Wheat in 1980, the nominal price was $173 per metric ton. GDP per total hours worked was about $3.24. So if you just divide that, you get around 53 hours. In other words, it took you 53 hours of work to buy 1 ton of wheat in 1980. So today, 2018, wheat's about $204 a ton. But GDP per total hours worked has increased to $15.88. So now the time price is around 12.8 hours. Do you see that? What's happening there? So over this 38-year range, nominal prices have increased by about 18%, but the GDP per total hours worked has increased by 390%. So this results in a decrease in the time price of 76%. Okay. Now here's a chart tracking that time price of wheat from 1980 to 2018. Now note that we'll see periods where that time price will go up. And this is to be fully expected. We'll have situations happen where that time price will increase. But we do know that when that happens, people will do 4 things. They'll use less, they'll go out and try to find more, they'll look for substitutes, and they'll also recycle. Those 4 things will ultimately create the incentive for the innovation to occur that's going to drive that price back down. The important thing to remember is look at that overall trend, a continual decline in that time price. So when prices decline, it's not obvious to us what's really occurring in terms of abundance. Now, to better understand that, we use something that we call a time price multiplier. And the time price multiplier is simply the time price in the base year divided by the time price today. If you take that multiplier, that will tell you how much abundance has changed over that time period. So let's look at the case of wheat. Wheat, the multiplier in the base year, 1980, was 53 hours. 2018, it had dropped to 12.8 hours. So our multiplier is 4.17. Now the way we can interpret that is you start at 1 and you went to 4.17. So you have increased this by 317%. Is that right? Now then we can take that number and calculate what the compounded annual growth rate is from 1 to 4.17. And that's suggesting that the compounded annual growth rate for this, we can go ahead and go to the next one. We can go ahead and take a look at this. If it drops by 76%, your multiplier's 4.17, which means that you're growing about 3.82% a year, which would mean that you're going to double the amount of wheat that you have every 18 years, about every 18 and a half years. So here's a chart. The next one is a chart of all of those 50 commodities over time, their time prices. And yeah, there's some static there. You notice the 100 line is where they all begin. And there were some commodities that got very expensive in terms of time over this period. But note where the underlying trend is and where they are today. The average has been about 71%. Zinc, it only fell by 22%. Uranium fell by 87%. Crude oils fell by 62%. So the next slide will show you, there's the trend line of all of those. So from 1980 to today, we get a drop of 76%. The time price multiplier for the whole index, 3.52, that would indicate a percentage change of about 252%. Your compounded annual growth rate there is about 3.37, which means about every 21 years you get twice as much stuff for the same amount of time. Every 21 years, I get twice as much stuff. So, in addition to George, our research was also inspired by this guy. And in the Infinity Wars, he says, it's simple calculus. The universe is finite, its resources finite. If life is left unchecked, life will cease to exist. It needs correcting. So where did Thanos get his ideas? Well, in 1968, Paul Ehrlich writes, society needs rescaling. We've got to reduce the size of the entire human enterprise. Now, one man challenged Ehrlich, an unknown economics professor named Julian Simon. Now, both Ehrlich and Simon believed that there was a relationship between population and resources. Ehrlich argued that as population increased, we'd run out of stuff and the prices would all skyrocket. Simon actually argued the opposite. He said as we add more people, prices will go down. We'll see prices go down. We'll see this abundance occur. Now, they had this argument through the 70s. Simon spent the 70s trying to convince Ehrlich, look at the data, look at what's happening here, look at my theory. And finally, in frustration, he said, how about we bet? And Ehrlich picked 5 metals that are non-renewable, and we'll put $1,000 on the table and see what happens in 10 years. So that's what they did. If the price goes up, then Ehrlich owes, if the price goes up, Simon owes Ehrlich money. If the price goes down, Simon owes, if the price goes down, Ehrlich owes Simon the money, okay? So Ehrlich, he picks copper, chromium, nickel, tin, and tungsten. Behold, one of the most important checks ever written in economics. This 10-year period, the real price had actually fallen by 36%. So our analysis says, people said, well, Simon was lucky, and it was only for 10 years. So our idea is, can we extend it to more than just 5, so we go out to 50, and can we extend it from 10 years to 38 years? And when we did that, once again, we find that prices had dropped by 71.6, somewhere around 71%. Now, during this same time, the population on the planet increased by 71.3%. So we added about, 3.2 billion people to the planet over this period. So the facts continue to vindicate Simon. Ehrlich's predictions, just utterly failed. So we also note something interesting, that during this period of time, every time we see, what we observed, what we notice is every time we notice that population went up by 1%, time prices would go down by 1%. So this is kind of interesting. Are you ready for a quiz? So in 1980, let's say you invite 100 guests to dinner, and it costs you $10 per plate to have them over for dinner. So your total bill is going to be how much? $1,000. So 2018, you're going to invite 71% more people to dinner, but the cost per plate's dropped by 71%. What is your bill going to be? Now our intuition is it's going to be the same, right? 71 up, 71 down, must be the same, right? Well, our intuition is wrong. The actual price is going to be what? Yeah. 5,000? Somebody says half, 5,000. Somebody's got to go back and talk to Mrs. Schwartz in the 4th grade about how these things work. Because if we take 171 times 71% of 10, we get $2.90. 171 times 290 is going to be, I think it's under $500, right? So your bill is actually gone, and your bill is half as much. So what we call this is superabundance. And the idea is every time you add more people to the game, George's dinner bill goes down, right? And this is what has happened since 1980 to these commodities. So we have quantified this relationship between population and resources to a new index that we call the Simon Abundance Index. So we take what's happening to population, what's happened to the abundance of resources, we set it equal to 100 in 1980, and that value has gone from 100 in 1980 to 602 today. Population increases 71.3%. Time prices are indicating abundance of about 252%. So this is pretty amazing news, I think. Next chart will kind of show you what's happened there. Now there are, once again, periods where this abundance kind of falls, where a lot of times we'll have war or some kind of event that will cause a little drop in it. But that underlying trend continues to increase. At this rate that we see this happening, we are doubling we're doubling at a rate about 5%, we're compounding at a rate about 5% a year, which would mean that we've doubled about every 14 years. So when Thanos and Ehrlich and Malthus, where did they go wrong? Well, they were counting quantities of atoms. And what's important in life is not the number of atoms. What's important is the value of those atoms. And these atoms become more valuable as they're surrounded by knowledge or they're intelligized. And that's really what's important. Instead of counting quantities or adding up quantities of atoms, they should have been looking at prices. Prices have a higher information density than just quantities do. When you go to the store to buy a loaf of bread, you count how many loaves are on the shelf, or do you look at the price? Do you even care about how many loaves are on the shelves, or do you care about the price? So shift from quantity to prices, and then you make the next shift by shifting to time prices. If you can go to time prices, then you're at the next level. And then if you can look at the change in time prices over time, you're really doing calculus. Those ratios of the price divided by the income, that ratio really reveals what's happening. Ratios reveal things. So where was their mistake? If they had been thinking in time prices over time, they would have reached completely different conclusions. Instead of doing addition, they should have been doing calculus. All right, one more quiz. How many keys are in a piano?
88.
88. This guy gets 100%. He's answered both my quiz questions right. So how many songs are in a piano? Okay. So engineers and politicians and regulators, they tend to count the number of keys. But economists like Julian Simon and George Gilder say, what we should be doing is listening to this infinite variety of human value, of value that's being created by human beings when they're free to discover and create innovations. In conclusion, I would like you to start thinking like George Gilder. I'd like you to invite you to start thinking in time, and the world will make much more sense. Thank you.